Councillors, and welcome to the City Planning, Economic Development and Environment Committee meeting of the 5th of October. I declare this meeting open at 9 a.m. and I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and their elders past, present and emerging. I'd like to advise attendees in the room that this meeting is being webcasted and audio recorded, and I remind attendees to practice social distancing and take necessary safety precautions. Due to the Queensland Government's current COVID-19 restrictions, this week of committee meetings will not have a physical public gallery. The health, safety and well-being of Logan's staff and community is Council's top priority. As such, I would like to mention an additional special welcome to the members of our community who are watching via today's live stream. All 6 of you, welcome. I'd also like to advise attendees in the room that this meeting is being webcast and audio recorded, and to remind attendees to practice social distancing and only remove your masks when you're speaking or eating or drinking. As today's agenda does contain a confidential report, I note that the proposed motion to suspend section 7.11A6 of the Local Government and Committee Meeting Code for the purposes of audio recording the closed sessions today in today's meeting for Council's internal confidential use only is now displaying on the screen behind me. Is there a mover for this motion? Thank you, Councillor Murphy, seconded by Councillor Stemp. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That has been carried unanimously. Leaves of absence. I have received a leave of absence from Councillor Bennon. I've received no further leaves of absence, so I assume the Mayor is on his way down. Can I please have someone move that Councillor Bennon be granted leave of absence for this committee? Thank you, Councillor Kransky, seconded by Councillor Bradley. All those in favour, please raise your hand. And that has been carried unanimously. Thank you very much. We'll kick off straight into our first deputation, which is a confidential deputation from Invest Logan. We've got Mehdi and Steve Greenwood. Sorry, Mehdi Hassan and Steve Greenwood from Invest Logan here today. I will note that it's considered necessary to take the discussion of this report into a closed session, as the confidential attachment associated with the covering report contains commercial and confidence information regarding Council's budget. Do any councillors wish to move into closed session for this briefing? You can't talk about numbers if you don't go confidential. Thank you, Councillor Bradley. Would someone like to second that motion? Thank you, Councillor Murphy. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That has been carried unanimously. Thank you very much. As that motion is carried, the meeting is now closed to the public. Please be advised that the meeting is now in confidential session, and therefore the recording of this meeting will be suspended until it reopens. Audio recording will continue for the purposes of internal record keeping only. All good. Welcome back to everybody watching at home. We've now completed the confidential part of the delegation from Invest Logan, and we have moved back into open session. Councillors, there will be a motion on the board in a moment. Thank you, Invest Logan, for their time and receiving their report. Can I have someone move that recommendation, please? Thank you, Councillor Lane, seconded by Councillor Stemp. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That has been carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate your time today and keep up the great work. Councillors, that marks the end of the Economic Development and Strategy Manager's reports. Do you have any general business for Dave Radich? Councillor Kransky?
Where is he? There he is. Good morning, David. I just had a comment. I asked that you'd please pass on my thanks to Ella and her team. As you know, we've all been very busy for a long time now working on Logan Village projects, but Ella was able to achieve what I thought was impossible, which was to actually get TMR to the table and to spend some money on doing some path work and to connect up the rail trail in Logan Village, and it really was a critical part of work to enable all our projects to synergise with one another. And I'd just like to acknowledge her publicly, that I know how hard she worked to make this happen, and she's got a great outcome. And I checked it out on the weekend, and you know, I think that's a great legacy project. Although it probably doesn't seem all that significant in the grand scheme of things, it certainly means a lot to the people of Logan Village. So thank you.
Through the chair, thanks Councillor Kransky. So that was a big team effort, so I'll pass on the thanks to Ella and the team.
I'm sure that there's a great team that sits behind there. I didn't mean to neglect to acknowledge them also, so please do, David. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kransky. You don't have any GB for us, do you, Dave? Thank you. Councillors, with your indulgence, we have a delegation that was trying to attend for the City Infrastructure Committee on the fast rail between Currabee and Beenleigh. They are going to be ready at 10 o'clock, and to adjourn a meeting, I need to give 10 minutes notice before the City Infrastructure Committee can commence. Do you know how long they need? Okay. Yep, so we'll, with your support, I'll adjourn the City Planning, Economic Development and Environment Committee for 1 hour to recommence at, quarter to, to recommence at 11 o'clock. So it'll be adjourned for 1 hour and 15 minutes. And then we'll resume the agenda as discussed, and we'll welcome the delegation when they're ready. Are you comfortable with that, Councillor Lane, as the chair? Thank you very much. Councillors, because the next items will take longer than 5 minutes to discuss, I assure you. We'll adjourn the meeting now. Can I have someone move that the meeting be adjourned until 11 a.m? Thank you, Councillor Stemp, seconded by Councillor Russell. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That has been carried unanimously. Thank you very much. The City Infrastructure Committee will commence at 9:57 a.m. Councillors, and welcome back to the City Planning, Economic Development and Environment Committee meeting. I have a motion on the screen that the meeting be recommenced at 11 a.m. Can I have someone move that, please? Thank you, Councillor Stemp, seconded by Councillor Bradley. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you very much. For those playing at home, we are up to item 5.1, which is the first report of the Health, Environment and Waste Manager, Michael Asnikar, which is the Wildlife Zone Vehicle Activated Signs. I'll now refer to Michael before he begins speaking to his report. Do any councillors have any conflicts of interest they'd like to declare on this item? There being none, take it away, Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Morning, everyone. There's been some interest from some councillors to have electronic speed activated wildlife signs installed in their divisions in addition to those locations identified in the city-wide priority locations. The installation of these signs, these additional signs, meet the local traffic improvements category under the local infrastructure program guidelines. However, point 8 of the guidelines state that LIP projects need to have the recurrent maintenance funding approved by council before the project can proceed. So the purpose of this report is to seek council's approval of recurrent funding for wildlife signs requested by councillors under the LIP. The proposed use of a combination of general revenue and environmental levy for the ongoing maintenance and relocation costs, respectively, recognises the general road safety outcome as well as the wildlife protection outcome that these signs aim to deliver. Upon approval of recurrent maintenance cost funding, we will proceed to process the LIP funding requests and order the signs. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I have a question from Councillor Harrimeyer and then myself.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question for Mr. Asnikar. I was reading this report, and on page 4 of the report, it states that the expansion of these signs to additional locations across the city will be also delivered through funding offered through the LIP budget at the discretion of the divisional councillor. Now, that statement may give the impression to the community that the local infrastructure program is a discretionary funding source that's just ticked off by a councillor. Now, my understanding of LIP is that's not how it works, and that understanding and that impression is not based in reality. So can you please offer some further explanation and clarification to the community as to the discretionary element of LIP? Because my understanding is that LIP is not a discretionary budget.
Yeah, through you, Chair. The sentence in which that statement was made was in the context of the discretion of councillors to order the signs, very much governed by the LIP guidelines. The LIP guidelines provide some very clear criteria around what LIP funding can be used for, and these signs meet one of those criteria. So there's no broad discretion to councillors to use it for whatever. It's governed by those guidelines.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Herrenmeyer. Michael, I appreciate you putting the research that Redland City Council did about the impact that the wildlife vehicle activated signs have on speeding, but did that research have any data about the actual impact on the reduction of collisions between cars and wildlife?
That trial is still underway. There's obviously the reduction in the speeding, and there is a strong correlation between speeding and wildlife collisions. But at this stage, we just need to see more data from that trial. Obviously, as council installs its signs, we will start doing that research as well. But I think one can reasonably assume that if fewer vehicles are speeding, there is likely to be fewer hits on wildlife.
And so the research essentially says that people slow down more when they see an image of a koala on a sign. Can we not just change all the portable speed advisory signs to show koalas so that they're more effective?
You mean the existing ones, Mr.
The
Chairman?
existing ones? Because I know they can be reprogrammed for the NRL to have a mask on, to have an Easter bunny, even a Santa Claus. Why not have a koala?
That's possible, but probably a few things to consider there is that the locations of those current signs are obviously put in locations where speed generally is a factor, not necessarily associated with a wildlife crossing area. However, they could be relocated to wildlife signs, but that would obviously take them away from their current use in existing areas. So this is these would be additional signs to those currently in use.
One of the PSAS signs in my area is close to a duck crossing. Can we get some ducklings put on a PSAS sign and then?
I think the AI in them is fairly flexible. You can program it.
Thank you, Michael. I've got Councillor Wilcox and Councillor Kerensky.
Thank you. And I was going to go along the same lines as well, because I know that I have a PSAS sign, which is very close to a duckling crossing. So I am hoping that we can have koala faces, kangaroo and duckling faces on there.
I understand the electronic part of the sign is programmable, but to what extent you can change those pixels and come up with an animal image, I'd probably have to take that on notice. I won't guarantee here and now that it'll be a duckling or a whatever, but I'm sure it's programmable to some extent, but I'd have to confirm.
That would be good, because my next question was, can we make sure that the PSAS and the VAS signs, the footings are the same, so that I can put in there a PSAS sign or a wildlife sign, so that I can move it so that when there's no speeding and it's coming into duck season, I can put my wildlife sign and I can put whatever pretty picture on it and that sort of thing. So that's what I'm hoping, so that I can have more footings in the division, more multi-use and more multifaceted, so that I can move things around. How many additional signs have we requested?
5 or 6.
All right, and that's across the divisions, I take it, and I think if there's 5 or 6, 2 of them are probably mine. Good-o. And I just wanted to make sure, with the installation costs, the ongoing maintenance, ongoing relocations, are those prices, are they the same as the PSAS signs? Because essentially, aren't they sort of the same signs? So just wondering if they are the same costings.
The maintenance and relocations, I believe they are the same as a PSAS sign. The actual sign itself, though, I think is more expensive than a typical PSAS sign.
Okay, great. Thanks. That's all.
And it's six additional.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilcox. Councillor Kerensky.
Thank you. I'd just like to move the report if I could, please.
Thank you, Councillor Kerensky. Michael, is there a reason why it needs to come to a budget amendment instead of just going to next year's budget register?
Well, only, Mr Chair, that if we get this done through a budget amendment now, we then have the security of the maintenance funding against which we can order the signs. Otherwise, if we don't have that maintenance funding approved by council, we're then waiting till next budget in order to be able to order the signs. And I understand that there's that there's some keenness to get these signs happening.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Chair. Michael, I'm sorry if this has already been explained, but I need to clarify for myself. If this is essentially the same product as the existing PSAS and the PSAS is cheaper and we can change the PSASs to have different images on them, why do we need a different product in order to achieve this? Thank you.
As I said earlier, I just don't know whether the PSAS signs have that level of configurability around them. And I understand the actual perimeter of the electronic part of the sign is also different on the wildlife sign. So they're actually wildlife marked. They're not just speed marked. So they are different, similar but different. I mean, I can follow up the difference, but we've done the research on the suppliers. This would be done on the back of a Brisbane City Council existing contract, so that's how we would procure them.
No further questions, councillors. Councillor Kerensky has moved. Do I have someone to second the report? Thank you, Councillor Stemp. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That is being carried unanimously. No, sorry, Councillor Bradley.
I'll abstain, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bradley. Councillors, we'll now move on to item 5.2, which is the report for the 2020-2021 Environment Levy Annual Report. Before we open discussion on this item, do any councillors have any conflict of interest they'd like to declare? There being none, I'll refer to Mr Adsakar to open the discussions.
Thanks, Mr Chair. This report presents the 2020-2021 Environmental Levy Annual Report, which provides a summary of the environmental levy finances and highlights of the key projects and services delivered in 2021. And with your permission, Mr Chair, I'd just like to spend a minute or two listing some of the key outcomes delivered for the community through the environmental levy. Council acquired 3 ecologically significant properties which were purchased in 2021. There was one in Greenbank, one in Tamborine, one in Slacks Creek. These properties add nearly 235 hectares of land to Council's conservation estate, further protecting koala habitat, strengthening wildlife corridors and waterway corridors. It supported our city's bush care groups and several community planning events across the city, as well as hosting Skilling Queenslanders for Work projects in bushland parks. The Skilling Queenslanders for Work assists young people in getting job ready while delivering in on-ground environmental restoration projects. It supported our now 542 conservation partnership property owners, most of those being in Land for Wildlife, who collectively manage nearly 6,000 hectares of land and 188 kilometres of waterways for conservation across the city. A very popular and growing program. Council held 28 environmental workshops and activities, as well as the successful return of Leaf and the Land for Wildlife Members Celebration Day. $190,000 was distributed under Council's EnviroGrants program for community environmental projects, environmental research and education, as well as supporting our wildlife carers and the Logan Animal Ambulance. On-ground waterway rehabilitation works were delivered in numerous locations across the Logan and Albert Rivers, Beliva Creek, Slacks Creek, Lake Dennis and Riverdale Park, Scrubby Creek, Logan River Parklands and Priest Gully. We continued to promote the activation and recreational accessibility to the Logan and Albert Rivers through enhancing the canoe and kayak trail. We delivered signage on pontoons at Rydell Park, additional canoe launching step on the new pontoon at Logan River Parklands, and additional installation of new and updated signage at riverside locations. We continued to monitor and manage priority wildlife species, such as for koalas, platypus, greater gliders, wallam froglet, swift parrot, birdwing butterfly, algosias and Melaleuca urbiana. And a highlight, of course, being the confirmed detection of the endangered spotted-tailed quail after many years of searching. And last but not least, a 200 kilowatt Solar power system was installed at the City Administration Centre, and energy efficient lighting was retrofitted at numerous libraries and depots across the city, all contributing to meeting Council's sustainability, energy efficiency and carbon neutrality goals. That list is really just a snapshot of the many initiatives delivered by the levy, and demonstrates Council's ongoing commitment to delivering environmental outcomes for the community. And in closing, I'd just like to mention that the environmental leadership and efforts of Council achieved some significant nationwide recognition during the year, including being named the best on ground by the Australian Greener Spaces Better Places Network, in recognition that the city's tree canopy increased from 41% in 2016 to 53% in 2020, despite our population growth of 2%. And a feature article in the 2021 Australian Local Government Yearbook showcasing Council's environmental work being delivered to achieve our Green City vision, particularly our environmental education and community partnerships program. The article concluded that, quote, Logan is setting an example as the green city to follow. So the 2021 Environmental Levy provides much more detail and is submitted today for Council's consideration. Sorry for the long blurb on that one.
That was a pretty good humble brag. Councillor Harrimeyer, if you'd like to ask a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just looking at the attachment and the annual report, and on page 6, under right next to the photo of the cute little wallaby, there's a title that says Connecting Landscapes, River Recovery, Nature Conservation and Climate Change Services. Could you please help me define what the climate change service is?
Through you, Chair, that's a catch-all term that we apply for our carbon reduction, energy efficiency and climate resilience initiatives. So various projects, including our climate resilience strategy, the installation of the solar, the energy efficiency lighting, and undertaking what Council can do in its local government sphere to reduce carbon emissions from its own activities, and also ensure that the way in which we approach our business takes into account climate and carbon reduction initiatives.
Thanks for that, and that sounds like a common sense services. But thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'm glad you think that climate change is common sense. Thank you, Councillor Wilcox. Your question?
Thank you. Thank you for that. Just wondering with the report, if I can get a copy emailed to me, because I know that I have a couple of residents that would like it. So at least I can be proactive and I can send it out before they even ask. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Wilcox. No further questions. Would someone like to remove the report for me? Thank you, Councillor Bradley. Second by Councillor Hall. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That has been carried unanimously, and I will stop playing with my mask and move us on to item 5.3, which is the report for the commencement of the local lawmaking process to improve the regulation of camping on council-owned or controlled land. Before Michael speaks to his report, do any councillors have any conflicts of interest they'd like to declare at this time? There being none, all yours, Michael.
Thank you. In June, Council endorsed a policy direction to amend Council's local laws to specifically prohibit camping on council-owned and controlled land, except where specifically permitted. The intent of this local law amendment is to assist in the timely resolution of issues associated with people camping on footpaths, roads or parks without a permit, where that matter cannot firstly be resolved through negotiation and connecting people to support services where required. This report is the next stage in the local lawmaking process and presents the specific proposed changes to local laws to give effect to this policy direction. Amendments are proposed to Council's local law numbers 5, 11 and 12. The report also outlines the proposed community engagement process to receive community feedback on the proposed local law changes. At the conclusion of the community engagement, the amending local law will be sent to the relevant state departments for a state interest check. And following community engagement and the state interest check, the next stage in the process will be a further report to Council providing a summary of feedback received and seeking endorsement to proceed to the final step in the formal local lawmaking process.
Thank you, Michael. I have a question from Councillor Lane.
Thanks very much through you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question. So this amendment does not we're not going to target people sleeping on benches, park benches, who are homeless, people who are parked in their cars in parks, who are staying there for their own safety. This is about RVs pulling up and staying there for 6 months and not using public facilities and having social issues as a result of that. Is that right?
Well, it's hard to define the specific circumstances, but basically camping is typically a caravan, a vehicle pulled up alongside a road where they set themselves up there for an extended period of time, and it starts to cause amenity and nuisance issues within the neighbourhood. A park bench, that's not something that has been an issue that we've experienced problems with. This has been triggered by that second type of issue that you've raised.
And just to confirm, if a person is, or a council officer does find a person who's in a bad circumstance, say a person fleeing domestic violence with a couple of kids living in a car for a couple of nights, they'll actually work with them to try and connect them to social services that can help them find housing. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely, 100%. We work with the person, connect them with support services, other assistance. Our goal here is not to come down with fines or big sticks. This is very much a last resort where we need to, after we've exhausted and extinguished all other options, to really have a local law provision to ask that person to move on if there are issues being caused.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Lane. I have Councillor Wilcox and Heremiah.
Thanks very much. Through you, Chair. Just wondering, on page 70 of the report, with the regulation of camping on council property, a person must not camp on council property unless it is authorised by a permit. Does that mean now that people who camp must have pre-organised permission to camp?
So at the moment there are existing requirements where, if it's an event, there are requirements for permits to be applied for camping. Until this local law takes effect though, the requirement to seek a permit to camp, in a non-organised, like in a park or on a road, isn't there yet. But the principle is that unless a permit has been issued, then that camping on a public place will not be approved.
So with Tully Park, I think the sign says you're allowed to camp there for 3 nights, I think, or something like that. So will people that are pulling up on their way through, will they need to have a permit in the future to camp there, to park there overnight?
No, because that's a permitted overnight stay park.
Okay.
Yep.
Awesome, thank you. And just wondering, with the community engagement, wondering if it would be possible if the rangers could provide the copy to those people who currently are camping in the permitted place, so that they can actually get feedback from them. And would I and possibly other councils be able to send out a letter to the residents in the immediate vicinity of the camping areas so that they can give their feedback as well?
Yeah, sure, we can arrange that.
Thank you, Councillor Wilcox. Councillor Heremiah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question's for Mr. Asnakar. Is the first attachment called Amending Local Law Number 1, 2022, has that document been drafted in-house or have external service providers been used?
It's been a combination. So we've had legal advice, so legal drafting of the local laws is typically the case, yeah, but also in conjunction with our city governance branch.
Can I please receive some information on the total cost of that legal advice to draft this Amending Local Law 2022?
I can circulate that. Sure.
Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Heremiah. Any further questions? Councillor Hall.
Just a couple of questions for you, Mr. Aziknikar. Just for the viewers at home who I believe need to kind of understand why council is going in this direction to change some of these local laws, how many cases would you say we currently have where we have unresolved issues because of the current laws that we have?
Current outstanding issues, I'd have to come back with that. I know that in the previous report we put to council the historical number of cases per year. I think we were around 4 or 5 per year that we received in terms of complaints. The majority of those we were able to resolve through negotiation and connecting people with appropriate support services. So it's really just a handful of issues that we would potentially require this backup local law to require people to move on where they otherwise are not doing so.
And out of those 4 or 5 that we have, what would you say would be the longest ongoing case that we've had because of the current law?
Several months.
Several months. So we've had situations where, we'd say, other residents have been concerned that they've seen a vehicle and we, haven't really had the ability with the current existing laws to move these people on for several months. And I think it's important that people understand the reason why we need to make these changes is because, we have these circumstances where we have people sitting on council property and council parks for months and months on end with no intention of moving, whereas these laws may make it possible that council can step in and take the required action to have these people moved. It's all right. Yep. No further questions.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. Any further questions? Is it a real question? Because we've debated this one already. This is just the second phase of these amendments. Councillor Wilcox.
Can you just tell me maximum penalty is 50 penalty units? I think there's a dollar amount next to it, but I don't know what that is. And for the general public, they don't know what that is either. So do you know off the top of your head?
Google knows, and we've all got internet access.
I'd have to come back to you, Councillor. I just don't know off the top of my head. I know it goes up every year, I think, so I just have to get the current figure for you and so I'll distribute it.
Thank you, Councillor Wilcox. $137.85 according to Google. Per penalty unit. Per penalty. So you would have to times that by 50 to figure it out. Are there any further questions? There being none, would someone like to move the report? Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Would someone like to second the report? Thank you, Councillor Hall. All those in favour with the amendment with the motion on the screen? That has been carried unanimously. Thank you very much, councillors. Councillors, we'll now move on to item 5.4, which is the South East Queensland Koala Conservation Strategy. Before we open discussions, do any councillors have any conflicts of interest they'd like to declare at this time? There being none, Michael, can you please speak to your report?
Okay, thanks, Mr. Chair. So the South East Queensland Koala Conservation Strategy 2020 to 2025 was launched by the Department of Environment and Science on the 29th of August 2020. To support the delivery of this strategy, DES has more recently prepared the South East Queensland Conservation Strategy 2020-2022 Phase 1 Implementation Plan, which I'll refer to just as the Implementation Plan from now on. The intent of the implementation plan is to improve the coordination of koala management and conservation actions in South East Queensland. The strategy and implementation plan establish a detailed framework for the delivery of koala conservation actions and activities by the Queensland Government and its various partners, including local governments. DES has requested that South East Queensland local governments consider the implementation plan and advise of their endorsement. In relation to the implementation plan itself, it's been prepared with consideration of council feedback and consequently reflects projects, initiatives and activities already being undertaken by council through our own City of Logan Koala Conservation Strategic Plan. So to that extent, it is being recommended today that the implementation plan be endorsed. However, there is one specific action being brought to council's attention in this report today, and that relates to the delivery of the action called State-of-the-Art Koala Habitat Mapping in SEQ. The ultimate extent of this mapping, in particular what's referred to as locally refined koala habitat mapping, has the potential to significantly impact upon population growth targets and infrastructure charge revenue if it is applied over council's existing identified growth areas. Consequently, The proposed locally refined koala habitat area mapping and criteria has been the subject of ongoing negotiations between DES and council officers. Given that DES are currently seeking SEQ local government endorsement of the implementation plan, it's considered timely today to concurrently seek council's formal endorsement of the principles proposed to inform the future locally refined koala habitat area mapping, which includes that it is of sufficient size and has adequate connectivity with other koala habitat areas to support and sustain a viable population of koalas through the application of science-based criteria, that it does not impact council's ability to accommodate future growth in the City of Logan to meet the state government's growth targets whilst balancing koala conservation outcomes, and it is to be applied equally to the state government's priority development areas which are currently excluded from the habitat mapping area. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Michael. I've got questions from Councillor Heremiah, Councillor Fraser and myself.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Asnakar, my question is about the relationship between the mapping and the implementation strategy. So right now, the downsides of that current mapping is that if it was to go forward, we would lose 450k in revenue a year. We would, there's a risk that we won't be able to achieve population targets, and that there's a risk that our planting will be reduced. Is that a correct summary of the current mapping in its current state and why we're trying to negotiate a better outcome for our city?
So just to clarify that, the current mapping does not impact these areas at the moment. The current mapping does not impact the areas. However, we have been in negotiation and we have seen some potential mapping that would impact the areas. So it's just seeking council's formal positions to enable council officers to continue those negotiations with DES to put forward those principles upon which we feel the future revisions to the koala habitat mapping should take into account, so they don't impact on those aspects for us.
And just,
Okay.
sorry, Councillor Heremiah, just to clarify, it's $450 million is the impact, not per year,
Oh,
but
there you go.
in total.
So my question regarding that is the department, we're negotiating with them around this potential mapping, and now they've come to us and they've requested that local governments endorse the final implementation plan. So if we endorse that implementation plan, will council lose any leverage, or will it have any negative impact on our future negotiations with the department about that potential mapping? Are we giving away one of our negotiating tools?
I don't believe so, because the action in relation to the mapping just talks about delivery of state-of-the-art koala habitat mapping, and we support that. We support delivery of good mapping. So I don't think there's an issue there. It's just the next layer of detail under that we are negotiating with them.
Thanks.
Councillor Fraser.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm just wondering, what's the history behind all this? Because I've heard that there's some properties that are unable to be developed in that right now. And so if you could tell me a bit of history, like where's this come from, I suppose, and what is in place now and what effects, I guess, this will have on the city, just like one or two major things.
Well, in terms of a brief recap, so the state implemented koala habitat mapping a number of years ago across SEQ, obviously to assist with the decline in the clearing of koala habitat. So it was just a measure to a conservation measure. In terms of the implications of the mapping, it can be basically no clearing allowed, or clearing requires an offset to be undertaken to compensate for that clearing. So very briefly, that is the typical implication of the mapping.
So this mapping, all the mapping is like of sound quality and of sound rationale, because I've just heard from at least one resident, they reckon that their property's like an island more or less between a whole bunch of areas where theirs can't be cleared or developed, but other surrounding properties have been. So whether that's true or not, I'm not sure. But this is a very sound sort of process and everything. There's nothing that is inconsistent. It should be done correctly, pretty much. Or
I suppose one of the principles that I just mentioned before is that, you know, typically an island of vegetation disconnected from anything else in the middle of urban development, you know, it doesn't provide long-term koala habitat. It's so disconnected, isolated, and, you know, relatively small that, you know, one can question whether that is going to provide long-term koala habitat. So without looking at the detail or understanding the specific detail of the property in question, that's one of the principles that we feel we bring to the table when we are negotiating the future mapping with the state.
Thank you, Councillor Fraser. I've got myself and then Councillor Lane and Mayor Power. Michael, when the original mapping was introduced in 2020, we already had clearly evidence-based koala habitat areas mapped through our planning scheme, didn't we?
Yes, that's right.
And were we consulted by the Department of Environment and Science about the overlay that they were going to apply to our city?
We have been consulted over the course of the last couple of years on proposed mapping, and like I said, we've been negotiating that with them in terms of some of the criteria that we feel needed to be included in their mapping criteria. That the mapping will continue to be refined, reviewed by the state. So, like I said before, what we're seeing today is really just an endorsement by council to support the principles upon which we will continue those discussions with the state. But in answer to your question, yes, we did have and we do have what we feel is sound mapping that that identifies our critical koala habitat areas in the city in the planning scheme.
And in the nearly 2 years since the koala habitat areas have been introduced, have they done any refining of their mapping at all?
They have.
They have?
They have done some refining of their mapping, yep.
Because my understanding was the original mapping was based, and this is from the mouth of the department, the original mapping was based on aerial photography alone. They acknowledge that it's not ground truth or related to evidence, that it's just a broad sweep that has massive impacts on people's property values and on where we can actually see intelligent growth in our city. So my question is, if they know that it's not a good map and that it's a broad map, I don't see why we should be endorsing their position unless they're actually like changing their mapping in good faith based on the evidence of the work that we've already done.
Yeah, so my comment in relation to they reviewed the mapping, they have certainly put out proposed new mapping, and we've brought into those discussions our local detailed mapping, which we feel, you know, brings and adds a lot of value to their proposed mapping in terms of refining it to what should be considered locally refined koala habitat mapping. So,
but they haven't removed any properties from the koala habitat area?
Not yet, no. So there is ongoing mapping that they're proposing to potentially introduce, but that remains the subject of negotiations between ourselves and the state.
So I struggle with endorsing anything when there's no good faith negotiation happening from the other party, because, and while I accept that it's the principle, which we all support in this room, that koala habitat is valuable and valuable koala habitat should be protected, but at the moment there's a koala habitat overlay over the top of the Point Corp development in Crestmead, which it clearly does not have any habitat left because they've cleared all the trees. So the overlay is inaccurate and it's not being updated, and they're not removing stranded properties, like you say. So why should we be endorsing their strategy when they're not negotiating with us in good faith, and they've shown no indication that they're actually going to change the koala habitat area based on evidence and ground truthing?
I suppose my comment in relation to that is that there's nearly 1,000 hectares of what we're calling contested area at the moment. The state certainly haven't just gone ahead and just applied it. They understand that's contested, and we'll continue to have those negotiations with them. I probably can't comment on some of the specific properties you're talking about, Councillor Raven, but yeah, we do need to continue those negotiations with them.
So to clarify, and this will be my last question, I'll let other councillors have a go. So in the contested areas, if you try to develop right now, you don't need to demonstrate that there's no koala habitat. There's absolutely no restraint on you if you're in a contested area. Because my understanding is that wherever the KHA is, you have to spend additional money to demonstrate that your property does not have koalas on it.
If it is currently mapped, like koala habitat area, then that's right. There are those mapping implications.
So the contested areas are already being impacted.
Nope.
No.
No,
So
no.
then new areas beyond the current area. So the
They are.
areas now are uncontested. So the overlay that sits across industrial estates where there's clearly no koalas, because all you need to do is drive down there and have a look. Those areas aren't considered contested. They're just considered pure koala habitat area with warehouses as far as the eye can see.
Yeah, again, I'd probably, on the specific locations, I'd probably need to come back on that one.
I can see the director.
Maybe the
twitching to
director
answer.
knows more about the specific example than I do.
I'll let the director answer and then I'll hand over to other councillors.
Through the chair, one of the specific examples I think we can talk to is up along Green Road, where there's some land identified for future industrial purposes. When a development application is lodged or has been lodged, there is a process that applicants need to go through to resolve koala issues. So that can result in an approval being issued to entirely develop that industrial area and provide an offset to the state to be able to develop that land. So the current regime doesn't necessarily mean that if you're zoned, you don't have to go through a process. I think the more relevant part is that we would like an acknowledgement in the LRKHA mapping going forward that where you're zoned for a jobs outcome or a population growth outcome that's been otherwise endorsed through our scheme or the SEQ regional plan, we would like some degree of protection moving forward that the koala mapping, new koala mapping as it slips over time and is refined over time, isn't going to undermine what council's aiming at in that regard. So we think that's a fairly simple exercise for the Department of Environment and Science to talk to the Department of Planning and get a confirmation that our growth targets aren't going to be undermined. And as the report talks to, the revenue that we predict through our LGIP, so that $450 odd million, that looks to be at risk if this new layer of koala mapping is to be implemented by the state. So that's revenue for trunk infrastructure that we may not receive if we can't come to a landing on this 900 odd hectares of contested area.
Thank you. And sorry, I lied when I said I'd hand it over to other councillors. So does the Department of Environment and Science have a good track record in your experience of communicating with the Department of Planning?
I think if they take the one government approach, then it's not overly challenging. This has been a 3 or 4 year journey, Michael. I think in terms of the latest iteration of the mapping, it's been all hands on deck from council's perspective to understand what the implications are and to bring our local knowledge to the table. I think it's a very simple exercise to receive the confirmation that we're after.
Wouldn't that be lovely? Councillor Lane.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Through you, Michael, I understand you've had a bit of a talk fest this morning. You said that isolated parts they're not sustainable for koala habitat. I'm just curious, so we've got all of this land and a lot of it's in Councillor Heremeyer's area, a lot of it's in Councillor Wilcox's area, and when I was a kid there was plenty of koalas there, but all of a sudden it doesn't really quite matter that there were koalas there given we want to build houses and big industrial estates. Now you can get an expert to say anything if you pay him enough. No, I'm sorry, but you can, whether it's a traffic report or whether it's a koala report. My question is, regardless of what laws we have in place, people are just wholesale clearing now and just copying the fine for renewing, as you said before. They revegetate or pay to revegetate. So isn't this kind of moot in any way, shape or form?
No, I don't think so. So I suppose what I'm talking about is a general ecological principle that if you've got small isolated patches of habitat, that it's very hard for those types of areas, islands of trees to support a long-term viable habitat area for koalas or other species. So, our wildlife corridor network, the offset planning that we're doing, that is intended to create across the city the wildlife habitat network that will support long-term viable areas for koala habitat.
And when somebody wholesale clears a portion, so you've got a leg, you've got a corridor, and that corridor is meant to support koalas and other wildlife. And someone along the corridor smashes out all the trees within their development and says, I'm happy to pay the fine because I can actually develop my property now. So you've actually then created isolated pockets, which I suppose in one respect Forestdale is. Flagstone will create it eventually, where it will cut across and cut the corridors. There are multiple cases of this, so are we fighting a losing battle with this altogether, or?
No, that's a compliance issue. If someone's smashing down trees, illegally, that becomes a compliance issue.
I'll let the
But
director.
they do it.
I'll let the director respond to that one.
Yeah, through the chair, Councillor Lane, it does happen from time to time. We're still dealing with some legacy issues through the city, but when you look at what the 2015 scheme that we currently operate under tries to achieve, we're really clear on where the koala habitat values sit. So when a development application comes in, we preserve, like they either have to steer clear of that land, re-embellish or, make it better for koala habitats. That's the rule that's applied. And I can't point to an example where we haven't secured, since 2015, we haven't been able to secure that outcome through the current scheme. We also should remember that it's our planning scheme at a local level, it's then the state's koala provisions, and there's federal protections under the EPBC Act as well, and there's penalties that can be payable if you do the wrong thing and clear koala habitat at a federal level. So be happy to take on any examples that you can provide to make sure we are taking compliance action as a council whenever we can, but there are two other regimes of compliance action for people doing the wrong thing.
Thanks. I just want to make sure that the almighty dollar doesn't actually rule over what we do as a council to protect, obviously, this species and others. I'm not a rabid greenie, but at the end of the day, I don't want us to be hypocritical about anything.
Thank you, Councillor Lane. We've got Mayor Power, Councillor Bradley, Councillor Kransky, Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I see a bit of a positive side on this in that our population growth targets have been met by this city, and we meet them quite easily, whereas other local authorities are not meeting their targets. There's no incentive to meet their targets. In fact, some would suggest there's a de-incentive because you get overlooked by the state government for infrastructure relief. So having this in place, to me, gives us a ammunition to preserve quite a bit of our rural areas, so that we're not spread out like Brown's cows and putting our infrastructure at a very thin line. Rather than just see the negatives, would you suggest there's positives to this?
Through the chair, absolutely, Mr. Mayor. Like we've been very clear with the government from the word go about our support for anything that protects more koalas and koala habitat. The issue in contention, though, is the quality of the mapping being relied on into the future and how it might, perhaps perversely outcome our own aspirations to contain growth to areas of our city that make sense. I wouldn't like to see us follow the discussion on koala habitat and preserve areas that are then going to undermine. I mean, we're looking for new greenfield growth areas beyond what we have at the moment, because my opinion is we don't need any beyond what we have at the moment.
I would suggest we accept the positives and obviously challenge those anomalies and move forward, because I think it's a positive overall. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Power. Councillor Bradley.
Thank you, and I am with the Mayor on this as well. And good that he's actually talking about positives. Yay. And I am a bit of a greenie when it comes to koalas. So I just over the years, we have consciously really tapped into where these koala corridors are and planned them. We've actually ground truthed them with the scatter dog, whatever you call them, and sightings, etc. over the years. I'm just maybe, Mr. Asnico, you can help me with the recommendation number 1, which refers to endorsing. I'm a bit hesitant about endorsing. It just doesn't sit well with me because you're saying you're right and what we've been fighting for so long is wrong. I would just receive. That's my thoughts. And I'm just mindful too that we're getting close to lunch and I'm just wondering if the chair has thought about that. Yeah, so that's just my thoughts. I'm just wondering if we could receive.
Thank you, Councillor Bradley. I have thought about lunch, but we'll try and get through the agenda and then we'll go from there. Did you want to respond to that, Michael, on whether or not we can just receive that? I've got Councillor Kransky next.
Just quickly, just repeating what I said before, is that the intent we are happy with of the implementation plan. So I remain happy with the word endorsed.
You stand by your recommendation. Thank you, Michael. Councillor Kransky.
Thank you. I won't be supporting this report today. And the reason for that is I too am somewhat of a greenie when it comes to koalas and have quite a bit of advocacy under my belt to prove it. But I'm sceptical as to the state government's intent. I've been involved in an advocacy campaign over the Logan River and swathes of koala habitat through the Camp Cable Road area and so on. And at that point in time, I was advised there simply wasn't enough state government intel regarding the mapping in that region. And as there wasn't enough intel and the mapping didn't support necessarily that there were koalas in that region, the state supported mowing over the top of the Logan River and Camp Cable Road area. So whilst I acknowledge there's some really lovely pictures of kids and koalas in their report, I'm sceptical as to the genuine nature of the arrangement and the adverse impacts or unforeseen impacts that council could be on the end of, including loss of financial support and so on. So I'm just a little worried if we endorse this, it could be a blunt instrument that's actually used to bang Logan residents over the head with in the fullness of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kransky. Not only that, the hypocrisy that there couldn't possibly be any habitat in the PDA areas, because koalas don't exist inside
the PDAs
PDA
actually
areas.
have koala habitat mapping and they have targets they have to adhere to.
But not the koala habitat overlay, not this one. The PDAs are excluded from this one.
No, not this
which
one.
they're
Correct.
asking us to endorse, which is a bit of a joke.
That's
Yeah,
not
thank
lost on me.
you. Yeah, and thank you, Councillor Kransky. Councillor Hall.
I'm a bit torn. Also a bit concerned. I'm a bit concerned that people are thinking about lunch when we've got a really important thing in front of us, which we should really be concentrating on. I'm torn because I do have areas that this koala mapping goes off that I can say for a fact that there are no koalas there whatsoever. I can say in all certainty that once upon a time there were koalas there, but they're gone. You know, they're wiped out. So I am torn because I do know residents who have properties which they should be able to do something with, but they can't because this mapping goes over it. But there's certainly no possible way that there'd be a koala there. On the other hand, I have to look, what else have we got which is actually going to protect our koalas? You know, what has council got which is better than what the state is doing to protect those koala reserve areas and those koala overlays?
We have detailed evidence-based mapping that uses infrared drones, scat dogs, and.
But can we enforce? Can we enforce the same way that the state government can enforce these?
Yes.
Can we stop developers from going forward with what they want to do?
Yes.
The same way that the state government can?
Well, we are better because we enforce it with evidence that when it goes to court, we can demonstrate it.
Could I have?
Yes, so Councillor, through the planning scheme, we have the overlays, our biodiversity overlays, which have been prepared based on ground truth, very rigorous scientific mapping to identify those areas of corridor, koala habitat, ecological value across the city. And the planning scheme is the key instrument that protects those areas.
Another thing is that we do have koala reserve areas, but what have we got to really stop roads from going through them? Because I think it's practically useless to make a koala reserve area and then cut a road straight through it. Would supporting this in any way stop roads from going through those reserve areas?
If you're talking about road infrastructure, I mean, all of the environmental studies around proposed road corridors take into account this type of mapping, environmental mapping, and part of the criteria around selecting proposed road corridors is to minimise impact to ecological values, including koala habitat.
My final question would be, do you believe that me supporting this as a councillor will better bolster and protect the koalas that we have in Logan?
I think the implementation plan is overall a sound document that clearly articulates the key actions, implementation actions, that the state and its partners, including local government, community groups, non-government organisations, wildlife carers, it's a holistic overall suite of actions designed to deliver the koala conservation outcomes. So from that perspective, like I said before, I'm happy for this council to endorse the implementation plan, but equally, we need to continue the negotiations with the state in relation to the robustness and accuracy of their locally refined koala habitat mapping in this city.
Because this being the case, my sister's actually a koala spotter and a koala carer herself. She'd shoot me if I was to do anything which would, put them in danger. So, I think anything we can do to protect the koalas, we should do. And, even though you may have some concerns with what the state government might be doing, if it's helping us protect our koalas, because, the conversation we'll be having 20 years from now, if we don't, will be, what are we going to do? How much money do we want to spend to bring them back?
Thank you, Councillor Hall, and appreciate your passion. Many of the areas that they're indicating are koala habitat areas aren't even remotely close to being habitat for birds, let alone koalas. So the point is already moved on a lot of the contested areas.
Can I just respond to that? Once upon a time, they probably were, okay, and they're gone. So I think whatever we can do to preserve what we have, we should grab onto and carry it and hug as much as we can, as much as they're hugging trees, okay? Because if we let up even a little bit, we're already losing the battle.
I would agree with you if the mapping was accurate. The councillors, I'd like to suggest an amendment to clause 1, if you can scroll up. So clause 2, I'll do it backwards. So clause 2 indicates a number of conditions under which we would like to see incorporated into the local, the locally refined koala habitat areas. So that is making sure that it's based on scientifically, that it's evidence-based, that it doesn't impact our ability to accommodate future growth that the state's going to put on us, because otherwise we will be having either urban sprawl or massive infill development to hit the same targets in areas that are currently at the state where the community is happy with it, and that will change drastically. And the last one is that it be applied equally to state government's priority development areas, because koalas live there too, Councillor Hall, as you rightly point out. I would like to amend the first clause so that where it says be endorsed, that it be endorsed subject to the criteria in clause 2 being met.
Yes, happy to.
So we're happy to say that we do endorse it in principle, and we are supportive of koala mapping being supported, but it's on the condition that those other criteria are met, because those are common sense conditions that make sure that there's actually rigour behind what's being done. Yep. And the director would like to clarify the PDA element.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to talk to the specifics around the PDAs. So there are development approvals in place at the moment that allow those PDAs to develop. They will not, by us saying that we would like these provisions to apply to them, that will not cut across those existing approvals. So if you're, if a developer is concerned that this decision today or us achieving these outcomes will undermine their approvals, that's not the case. The bigger concern, I guess, for us as officers is that if new PDAs are announced in the city, or expanded PDAs, or developers come in and relitigate existing approvals and apply for amendments to them, we believe that these new provisions and the new mapping should apply in those circumstances. So we're not cutting across existing approvals or existing development rights, but there would be a point at which, if those were expanded or new PDAs, that we would like to see this incorporated.
Thank you, Mr. Director. Councillor Jeremiah, and then I'll test the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you please scroll down a bit on your amendment? Just a bit more. A bit more to 2A. So a difference between the recommendation and the amendment is that there's an included little phrase that says after koala habitat, says areas to sustain a viable population of koalas through the application of science-based criteria. Now that wasn't in the original recommendation. What I'm wanting to do is ask Mr. Asnikar or the director, does this amendment have the support of council officers? Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Jeremiah, we put that in specifically after the papers were printed, just to reinforce that what we're about under this principle is the application of good science when it comes to identifying those koala habitat areas in the city. Just to reinforce that point.
So the amendment, thanks for that, and the amendment on the board with the changes to 2A and clause 1, does that have council officer support?
Subject to criterion clause 2. Oh, look, I might want to defer to my director here for a minute, but yeah, he's nodding. Yeah, no.
Through the Chair, just to be clear, the Department of Environment Science is asking Council to endorse something that we haven't written. We participate in the preparation of it. So in many ways, it's something that you can decide to do or not do. We think that it's important to show our support as Council to endorse the implementation plan, but to be very clear that the journey over the last 3 years on the mapping hasn't been easy, and we haven't reached a landing point yet, which we're happy with. So to tie our support to the implementation plan to achieving these very tangible things for the mapping, I think is a great idea. So it has my support.
Thank you.
Mine too. Yeah.
Good way to support the boss there, mate. Well done. Councillors, you have an amended motion on the screen. Are councillors comfortable to vote for it, or would you like to scroll through it and read it again? Are you wanting to move it as well, Councillor Hall, or second it? Move it? Okay. We're just scrolling through at the request of the Mayor, and then I will put the motion.
Can I have some clarification on 2B in what you're trying to actually get across? I don't want it to be ambiguous.
So the intent of 2B is just very much to make the point that the mapping should not impact council's ability to accommodate the growth targets that have been set for this city. As the director mentioned before, mapping across identified growth areas has the potential to impact our ability to meet those growth targets. So that's the intent of that. We don't want to compromise that that outcome.
Okay, if that's the wording, then I think we should tighten it up a bit, because the way to me, it looks like you're asking that, to me, my interpretation is that if the state government want more urbanisation, they're going to disregard the koala mapping and allow us to put more residential development in those areas where the koalas are. So can we tighten that up a bit?
Through the chair, I think the concern is that these two pieces of legislation will operate independently. So the koala regs will play out in a development assessment and it'll stop development in its tracks. Therefore, if that was to happen, when they come to refresh the government comes to refresh the regional plan, they will say, okay, well that land that we previously thought was going to accommodate jobs and residents cannot achieve that. Therefore, we're off looking for another growth front. That's the concern, not so much as what you were articulating.
You've got to remember that this recommendation will be read by residents and the media. I don't want it to bring the wrong message out. Can we tighten it up a bit? Because it just, to me, it reads that we don't want it to affect the growth targets. In other words, just ignore the koala mapping, just put more residential development in those koala areas, because it just does not impact council's ability to accommodate future growth in the City of Logan to meet the state government's growth targets. To me, if we can tighten that up, I'm not happy with the way it's worded, because if the average punter out there was to read that, it looks like we're concerned that it's going to reduce the amount of land available for the population growth targets. You know, see any ambiguous statement there?
So
I think we need to tighten it up.
I'm happy to take recommendations for how you'd like to tighten it up. It says future growth, not current growth.
So,
And it says whilst balancing koala conservation outcomes. So in consideration that you must protect koala habitat, real koala habitat.
we must protect it.
But, and it says,
And
like
the
it says
state,
balancing
we'd like
koala
to acknowledge, the state government acknowledge this when putting future growth models up.
Through the chair, my documents jumped all around the place. Apologies. I wonder whether it's the addition, so B does not impact council's ability to accommodate future growth in the City of Logan to meet the state government's growth targets within the currently defined urban footprint, which means we're talking about.
As long as you define it, because it looks like you want to continue on with the state government's growth targets into the koala areas. That's the way it reads.
I've got Councillor Lane and then Councillor Wilcox. I don't entirely agree with.
So following on from the Mayor's comment, my first thing on reading that is we're happy to have koala protected habitat except for when we don't want it. And that's the way I read it. So I absolutely get what you're saying, Mr. Mayor. I read it differently to you, but that's my outcome from that was we like it except for when it doesn't suit us. And when the state's trying to push, growth targets on us. So we'll just write it off.
How do the words balancing koala conservation outcomes equal write it off or ignore it?
So the first part says it does not impact council's ability to accommodate future growth in the City of Logan.
Yes.
To meet the state government's growth targets whilst balancing koala conservation outcomes. So if you're a person that has watched over the last 25 years as koala habitated area gets decimated for growth, and we just had the issue of Flagstone, it doesn't cover PDAs, so there's always exceptions. So we love koalas except for when we don't and we want to build something. When the director made that comment, I sort of thought, oh yeah, that sounds about right. It's all good for the state until they want to build something, and then they take away that protection. That's, to me, is exactly what that phrase does as well. which is, we're happy for it except for when it impacts our ability to deliver the state's growth targets.
I would agree with you completely if the words whilst balancing koala conservation outcomes weren't there.
So move the words whilst balancing koala conservation and not amending any blah, blah, blah. But until you do that, you're actually just saying it's going to be adjusted. That's just in my mind. And you know what? I'm an average punter. So maybe
Happy
it's,
for you to
maybe
make
it's
a
the
suggestion.
sillier and
Thank
dumb
you.
people of the community that think that way.
Thank you, Councillor Wilcox. Please make a suggestion. It's
Teacher-
vague negative feedback.
Teacher hat on, you need to reword it. I would start with Logan City Council whilst balancing koala conservation outcomes, and then lead into the rest of the statement, because I agree it doesn't read right, so I would reverse it.
For a start, Mr Chair, why are we accommodating the state government's growth targets when no one else is doing it?
No one.
Then no one is trying to do it. Brisbane, Redlands are all rewarded by not meeting the targets. Why are we so worried about knocking down land with koalas on it to meet their targets? We're not. It's the wrong way of portraying this picture.
I understand your principle.
The
I just want
wording
you
is
to actually make a
rubbish.
suggestion.
I'm going to ask to remove B
That doesn't even change it.
because it just doesn't make sense to me.
So you're happy for growth to be unrestrained by the state with koala habitat?
No, that's not what I'm saying, Mr Chair. I'm saying that B sends the wrong message to the community, and it to me, it looks like we are so worried about meeting the population growth targets of the state government, we're prepared to knock down the land even though they've got koalas on it. That's what it means to the residents out there, if you put that out there. That to me is badly worded, and what I suggest is that maybe we work on it between now and full council, but I'm not prepared to move that line there unless someone's prepared to change it, because I understand that it's too ambiguous.
Yeah, I don't think reversing it changes the meaning, although it might read slightly better. So the director has a comment, and then I'll just I'll defer the report to full council.
Just to, I guess, reinforce the intent of what that clause is trying to do, we currently have X hectares of urban footprint available for development in the city. The concern that we're trying to respond to here is that by applying additional koala protections into that X hectare area, that the growth that we thought we understood and we're planning for and our current planning scheme plans for, that growth is not going to occur, and that we will be off looking for other urban footprint in a new regional plan, and then we as a council will have to respond to that in our new scheme. So that's the intent of what we're trying to address here. I think it is very important that we maintain a clause in that regard, but I'm more than happy to take it offline, socialise it through the councillor group between now and an ordinary council. But that's the intent, that we don't agree to a mapping change that then forces our growth fronts out beyond where we think they are at the moment and where we know they are.
Or turns rural residential into low density residential overnight.
Chair, I understand what the intent is, but I clearly can't see the intent in the recommendation. And I'm aware that residents will read this and get the wrong impression. So rather than have an ambiguous resolution, I suggest that and time is of the essence, and we've still got another committee to go, and it's coming up to lunchtime. I would suggest that we revisit this and the matter be deferred to the extra meeting so we can come up with a resolution.
Yes, I was happy to do that without the reinstigation of it. So
I'll move.
thank you. The mayor has moved that the matter be deferred to ordinary council, seconded by Councillor Lane. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That has been carried with the exception of me, who is abstaining.
Excuse me, Chair. Is that the time when we ask a question just about, so apparently 43,000 Victorians have left their home state and headed up this way, and God only knows how many people from New South Wales. Will you look at that as part of this recommendation? Sorry, for the future one? given that we're going to be under a lot more sustained pressure to accommodate all of those people heading north.
Yeah, through the chair, Councillor Lane, that's precisely why I really would like a clause in this recommendation which deals with it, because the resetting of our population obligations for the city through the regional plan, it's a conversation we're going to be having as a council over the next 18 months, definitely, so that will form part of it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, because what we don't want to see happen is areas that are currently rural residential, rural park living, being turned into low-density residential or high-density residential, because some of the contested areas sit over public transport corridors, which we would normally put higher densities in. But under this, even though there's not koalas there, under this we may be having urban sprawl to avoid an inaccurate koala habitat area. That's my concern. So I want balance. Like, I want to protect koala habitat that's real koala habitat. And I think everybody wants that. But anyway, I'm sure we'll get an excellent recommendation for Ordinary Council. Councillors, it is 12:15, nearly 13 past 12. We have 1, 2, 3 reports to go. Would you like to adjourn for half an hour lunch break and resume the committee at that time? No worries. I've got head nods and head shakes, so I will put that the meeting be adjourned. Councillor Bradley has moved that the meeting be adjourned until 12:45. Would someone like to second that motion? It's been seconded by Councillor Harrimeyer. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That has been carried 8-5. I'm against. Councillor Power is in favour. Yes. Councillor Bradley is in favour. Councillor Lane is
I think we should keep going.
against. Councillor Russell is in favour. Councillor Kransky? Support. In favour. Councillor Hall?
I'm against. I was brought here to work.
Councillor Hall? Councillor Fraser is in support. Councillor Harrimeyer is in support. Councillor Stamp is against. Councillor Wilcox is in support.
Yeah, I'm against. I'm happy to keep on track.
Against, and Councillor Murphy is in support. That's 7-5. 7-5. 7-5. Before it was 8-5 because I couldn't count.
That's when we need to have lunch.
Now it's 7-5. Thank you, councillors. Meeting will resume at 12:45 sharp.
Can I just ask a question? We're meant to have this at tea.
Commence the City Planning, Economic Development and Environment Committee. Can someone please move that we recommence? Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Seconded by Councillor Lane. All those in favour? That is carried unanimously by the councillors who are in the room, including the newly arrived Councillor Kransky. Thank you for having your lunch in a very expedited fashion, councillors. We'll now move on to item 5.5, which is the Sub-Regional Waste Alliance Progress Update. Before I let Michael speak to this, do any councillors have any conflicts of interest they'd like to declare? I note that this item is confidential because the confidential attachment contains information regarding a current procurement, and disclosing its contents would likely prejudice the interests of the local government. Do councillors need to move into confidential, or are you happy to accept the report as read and vote on it as stands? As no one is moving me into confidential, I will take that the report is read and you would like to see it on the screen to vote on it. Councillors, there is a recommendation on the screen before you, moved by Councillor Stemp, seconded by Councillor Harrimeyer. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That is carried unanimously. Thank you very much. And that is how we get through a report. Thank you. Noting the absence of Councillor Bradley. Yes. Sorry, let me catch up to where I am in the script. Michael, that brings us to the end of the Health, Environment and Waste Managers report. Michael, do you have any general business for us?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for enduring our grilling questions. Councillors, do you have any general business for the manager? There being none, please resume work. Thanks, mate. Councillors, next we have the reports of the Development Assessment Manager, Stephen Ball, who is gallivanting his way into the room, who's not there, so, and he's been waiting patiently all morning too, poor guy. The report before us is item 6.1, the update on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander bursary program. I note that this report is confidential. Before I let the director speak to the report, do any councillors have any conflicts of interest they would like to declare at this time? There being none, councillors, the report is considered confidential as it may require a change to council's budget. Do any councillors wish to move into confidential to discuss this report? Are you happy to vote on it as it stands? Councillor Lane would like to move into confidential. Would someone second that? Thank you, Councillor Wilcox. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That is carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We'll now move into confidential session and the video recording will stop. There'll be another one in a sec. Is anyone happy to move that recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Kransky, second by Councillor Lane. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you, that has been carried unanimously.
Mr Chair, I note Councillor Bradley's not here at the moment.
Yes, that Councillor Bradley remains absent.
Okay, thank you.
That brings us to the end of the Development Assessment Manager's reports. He's not here, so he doesn't have any GB for us. Do we have any GB for the Director? Councillor Lane.
So, Mr Director, I sometimes struggle with the DA stuff, and you've got some lovely people working in your branch, and they are very patient, they are very understanding, and they also take on board my concerns. And I just wanted to feedback that I really do appreciate the support that they give me, sometimes it's on a daily basis, other times it's a weekly basis, but I genuinely appreciate the way in which they conduct themselves. I'm not made to feel like a dill, except for sometimes when Justin looks at me in a particular way. But I just wanted to feedback that they actually really do take the time to explain things. They take my concerns on board and they actually act on them. So could you please pass my thanks back?
Thank you, Councillor Lane. No further GB for the Director. Oh, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Dave, we're approving a lot of service stations. Appears to be that they seem to be going up. We're losing court cases and service stations are appearing. But there is a definite trend towards electric vehicles. Is there going to be a plan there, or what like it's estimated, I think they were suggesting in 5 years' time at least 20% of the vehicles will be electric. So the consumption of obviously gasoline is going to continue to go down, and more and more companies are bringing out electric vehicles. What will happen with these service stations? Are they, there seems to be more of a drive. Is there an evolution that they're going to convert from gasoline to recharging stations, or is there something in the wind that residents don't know? Because residents are asking me why they're building more petrol stations when people are going towards electric vehicles.
Through the Chair, I think the model for service stations has changed dramatically, even in recent years, aside from the electric. Sort of there's an offering now around food and drink and car wash, and they've become more than what they traditionally were sort of 20 and 30 years ago. I think the new scheme is an opportunity, the new planning scheme for 2025 is an opportunity for us to consider as council what we may want to encourage in the service station space. So by then we'll probably have a more established network of charging through the state, and we'll know what the state and federal government are going to do in terms of building that network, and maybe there's an opportunity for us to participate through, encouraging the incorporation of EV charging, and maybe there's an incentive or a development outcome that we can consider to drive that outcome. So perfect opportunity for the new scheme, I think, Mr Mayor.
Okay. I just want to say thank you for the number of car puns when you're driving outcomes for EVs. Councillor Kransky.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson. I appreciate you've been away on leave for a little while, so you may not have the answer to this question. But while you were away, we actually opened Woolworths at Bannockburn, which was very exciting for the community. But I have received a volley of emails and inquiries regarding a central median strip that exists on Bannockburn Road. And it's preventing residents from being able to pull right into the service station. Now, council officers were good enough to provide me with a request, with a response to my request regarding the median strip, and this is from the acting principal planning officer, that the concrete divide has been constructed as a result of conditions imposed by the Department of State Government Infrastructure Development and Planning as part of the original Woolworths application way back in 2015. And being a state-controlled intersection, you may have heard me raise this in ordinary council before, that this is one of the intersections that the mayor has kindly written to the minister and so on, advocating for upgrades to. But the question the community would like me to answer for them is, how can they best advocate to have access reinstated into the service station that is the United Service Station down on the corner there? Is this actually a question to direct to council, or is this a question to direct elsewhere?
I know that, through the chair, I know the development well. Off the top of my head, I would suggest that if the developer or the centre owner was to request an amendment of that condition to perhaps reflect that time's moved on, or that there's a community expectation and that it could potentially be done safer than what was considered back in 2015, that would be a good place to start. And then council, using our own internal resources, could perhaps do our own assessment, maybe lend weight and support to the developer's request for an amendment to the conditions that govern that median strip. So what I'd suggest is we can come back to you with maybe some wording around the approach that we prefer to take, and you could pass that on.
It's not actually a request of the developers, but a request of a number of residents. But if I gather some collateral behind that and forward that on to you, would you be able to investigate it for me?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Councillor Kransky. Any further general business for the Director? There being none, thank you very much, Dave. I release you from your fealty. Councillors, next we have item 7.1, which is Council's federal election preparation and priority projects. That is a report of the Innovation and City Transformation Directorate. So we'll get Dr. Scott Burke and Ms. Pietzner to come in, please. Councillors, while we wait for them to arrive, do any councillors have any conflicts of interest they would like to declare on this item before I test whether you want to enter confidential? There being none, I note that the report is considered confidential as the attachments contain information relating to advocacy tactics and potential projects that are yet to be allocated a budget. Do councillors wish to move into confidential to discuss this report, or are you happy to take it as read and vote on it accordingly? Would anyone like to move into confidential? Mr. Mayor has moved. Would someone like to second? Councillor Murphy has seconded. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That has been carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. The recording will now cease and we'll proceed into closed session to discuss the report. Okay, they don't need to be here. We have quorum. Thank you, councillors, for your engagement and discussion on that item. The meeting is now reopened to the public and we have a recommendation on the screen in a moment.
You have to table the PowerPoint.
Oh, first let me table the PowerPoint presentation that was given to us as a confidential document. I don't need someone to second it. I will move it. All those in favour, please show your hands. Thank you. That has been carried unanimously. Noting that Councillors Kerensky and Mayor Power have left. And now we'll bring up the recommendation. So, he is His Worship. I have assurances from the program leader that the list that has been discussed in confidential will be the list that this document refers to. Councillor Lane has moved this recommendation. Would someone like to second it, please? Councillor Russell has seconded it. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That has been carried with the exception of Councillor Heremiah.
Against.
And Councillor Stamp.
I'm abstaining from this one, thank you.
Thank you, councillors. That brings us to item 7 point, let me catch up, 2, which is an exemption for inviting tenders for the Digital Infrastructure and Connectivity Program. Before I move into discussion on this item, do any councillors have any conflicts of interest they'd like to declare? There being none, I note that it's considered necessary to take the discussion of this report into a closed session as the confidential attachments contain information relating to a commercial in confidence matter. Do any councillors wish to move into confidential to discuss this item, or are you happy to take the item as read and vote on it as it stands? No one is happy to move into confidential, which I'm grateful for. There is a motion on the screen. I'd like to specifically thank Councillor Heremiah for asking questions ahead of time that he could get answered. It helps the flow of the committee greatly. And Councillor Stamp as well. Councillors, you have a recommendation on the board. Would somebody like to move that recommendation? If you don't want to move the recommendation, then you have to put something else. Thank you, Councillor Hall. Seconded by Councillor Fraser. All those in favour, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That is carried. Councillor Bradley. Did you? Councillor Lane. Oh, sorry. I missed you in the corner of my eye. Councillor Lane.
Against.
Councillor Heremiah.
Against.
And who else didn't put their hand up? That was it? Excellent. Thank you very much, councillors. That brings us to the end of the reports for the Innovation City Transformation Directorate. Do any councillors have general business for the Director? Does the Director have any general business for us?
I do not, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillors, that brings us to the end of the City Planning, Economic Development and Environment Committee meeting of the 5th of October, the time being 2:11 in the afternoon. The City Infrastructure Committee will resume in 10 minutes at 2:21. Oh, sorry, it's 2:06, not 2:11, at 2:16. Thank you.